The day I buried my wife, my brother stood over her grave and called me a liar. He said her last words weren't about love or peace, they were about him. That she'd confessed our family's darkest secret, that the little girl he raised was really mine. People gasped. Cameras came out. My name, my wife's name, were dragged through the dirt, right beside her coffin. I didn't say a word that day. I just looked at him, and I knew. He had no idea what kind of truth he'd just woken up. My name's Donald. I'm 60 years old, and if you're hearing this, it means the truth finally made it out. If you're watching, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you were listening from, because I want to know how far a story like mine can travel. A story about love, betrayal, and a kind of revenge that didn't break me, it faced me. The day I buried my wife, the ski looked like old steel. Cold, peaceful, unforgiving. Elaine had been gone 3 days. 35 years together, and just like that silence, I stood by her coffin while the pastor talked about heaven, mercy, and everlasting love. People nodded, but no one really listens at funerals. They just wait for the food and the gossip that comes after. My hands were shaking so bad, I had to keep them locked behind my back. Grief knows that it makes you look older than you are. I remember the scent of the lilies on her casket. She loved those damn flowers. She said they smelled like Sunday mornings before coffee. I hated them. Now I can't walk past a florist without feeling that smell crawl under my skin away. I thought that day would end quickly. We'd put her in the ground, say a prayer, and maybe I'd start learning how to breathe again. But then Gary showed up. He came late wearing a black suit that didn't fit and sunglasses that didn't belong to him. My little brother, 3 years younger, same blood, different soul. He hadn't spoken to me in almost a year, ever since I refused to bail him out after his last business deal went south. He walked right up to the podium, pushed past the pastor, and cleared his throat. I remember thinking, what the hell is he doing? Before we say goodbye to Elaine, he started, his voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. There's something everyone needs to hear. The crowd shifted. My sister-in-law clutched her purse tighter. My father's old army buddy leaned forward, like he was watching a car crash. Gary held up a piece of paper. It was folded, creased, and smelled like cheap cologne. This, he said, is Elaine's last will and testament. I felt my stomach drop. She already had a will. We'd made it together with our lawyer Harris 2 years ago. Gary kept talking. In this document, he said, Elaine admits something she couldn't take to her grave. She confesses that my daughter Lily, he paused for effect, is actually Donald's child. The world tilted. Someone gasped. I heard a glass clink. She wanted the truth out. He continued, his voice swelling with fake grief. And she wanted Donald to do right by Lily. Half of the Maple Avenue house, worth nearly $1 million, is to go to her name. The church fell into a suffocating silence. All I could hear was the wind outside and the click of someone's phone camera. My first thought wasn't anger. It was disbelief. Lily, sweet, shy Lily, who played with Elaine in our garden, who called me Uncle Don since she could talk. Now Gary was claiming she was mine. And worse, he dragged Elaine into it. My Elaine barely in the ground. I stared at the paper in his hand. He'd printed it on regular copy paper, not even thick enough to pass for official. But the room didn't know that. The whispers started immediately. Oh my God, is that true? She didn't have kids. Maybe she wanted to make it right. Poor Donald. Poor man. Poor man. I could hear them all thinking it. The old fool who didn't know his wife had a secret child. Gary turned toward me, eyes glistening with crocodile tears. I'm sorry, brother, he said softly, but the truth had to come out. Elaine wanted Lily to have what's rightfully hers. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just looked at him, the way a man looks at a rattlesnake that slithered too close to his boot. In that moment, I understood something terrible. Gary wasn't drunk or desperate or confused. He was prepared. He'd planned this. He'd printed that paper. He'd timed it perfectly right when the dirt was still fresh on my wife's grave. The pastor tried to step in mumbling something about decency and time for grief, but Gary just raised his voice. "Don't you see," he said. "Elaine wanted peace. She wanted her daughter cared for daughter," he said again, as if repeating the lie would make it truth. I could feel eyes drilling into me. Some sympathetic, others suspicious. That's the thing about small towns. Truth doesn't matter. Only stories do. My old neighbor Ruth walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Don," she whispered, "is any of this real?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat felt like gravel. Inside, though, something old and heavy started to wake up. Not presage. Something colder. A kind of quietness that hums right before a storm. I took a step forward. "May I see that?" I asked. My voice came out calm, steady, too calm. Gary hesitated, then handed me the paper with a little smirk. The signature at the bottom looked like Elaine's, but wrong. Too perfect, too clean. Elaine's hands had trembled the last few months. Her real signature always leaned left. "This isn't her handwriting," I said softly. Gary forced a smile. "Maybe she signed it before she got sick." I folded the page neatly, slid it into my coat pocket. "Thank you," I said. He blinked. "That's it. That's it." I walked down the aisle, past the murmuring guests, past the lilies, past the coffin. I didn't stop until I reached the church doors. The wind hit my face like ice water, but it felt good. Real. Behind me I heard Gary's voice still echoing through the hall, telling people how he'd fight for Lily's rights, how Elaine had wanted this. I didn't turn around. When I finally reached my truck, my hands stopped shaking. For the first time since Elaine died, I felt something sharper than grief: clarity. If Gary wanted a war, he just declared it over my wife's grave. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the paper in my pocket, and said to the empty seat beside me, "He's lying, sweetheart. And I'll prove it." The sun dipped low, bleeding red across the church steeple. I looked back one last time, watching the doors close behind the people who'd once called themselves my family. Then I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else, "There's something Gary doesn't know about Elaine or me," and that was the moment everything changed. When I look back now, it feels like my whole life with Elaine was made of small, ordinary moments that somehow added up to something extraordinary. We met at a gas station off Highway 54 in the summer of '87. I was 22, working double shifts at the lumberyard, just trying to make rent. She was 20, with a college map folded on her lap, and a smile that looked like it had never met a reason to fade. Her car had overheated. I offered to take a look. Truth is, I didn't know much about engines back then, but I wasn't about to let that stop me. She laughed when I burned my hand on the radiator. "You don't have to impress me, cowboy," she said. I guess I tried anyway. By the time I got her car running, the sun was setting, and she'd told me half her life story: how she wanted to teach art, how she hated small talk, how she believed kindness was the only real currency that lasted. I asked if I could take her to dinner. She said, "If you promise not to fix anything else tonight." That was Elaine. Quick, honest, a little stubborn, and somehow always right. We got married 2 years later in a white-painted chapel outside Wichita. My mom cried through the whole ceremony. My dad just nodded like he approved of the choice. Gary, my best man, cracked jokes about how I was locking myself up early. He was 20 then, reckless, wild, already chasing get-rich-quick dreams. I didn't see the darkness in that yet. Elaine and I bought a modest house on Maple Street, the one Gary later tried to claim half of. Back then, it cost $110,000, felt like climbing Everest. 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, a big oak out back that dropped acorns the size of marbles. It wasn't much, but it was ours. We filled it with love, not things. I built her an art room with my own hands. She painted the walls a soft yellow, said it felt like sunshine you could touch. On weekends, we'd sit on the porch swing with iced tea and talk about someday. Someday kids, someday vacations, someday a bigger house. But someday has a cruel sense of humor. We tried for years to have a child. Doctors tests the whole painful cycle. Every month, hope rose and fell like a waif that never reached the shore. Elaine handled it with grace, more grace than I deserved. The truth came one winter afternoon at Dr. Patterson's office. I still remember the ticking clock, how the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. He said the words gently, but they hit like a truck, Donald. It's unlikely you'll ever father a child naturally. Unlikely. That word stayed with me. Not impossible, just unlikely enough to break a man quietly. Elaine squeezed my hand and said, "We'll make a life anyway." But in my head something cracked. It's hard to explain what that kind of news does to a man raised on pride and silence. I loved her too much to let her see how it gutted me. So we built a different kind of family, nieces, nephews, friends, kids, students. She taught in art class. Our home became the place where everyone gathered for Christmas, birthdays, stray Sunday dinners. It was full of noise, laughter, and a kind of borrowed joy that almost felt like the real thing. Gary would drop by once in a while, usually when he needed something. Money, a place to crash an investment loan. He called it opportunity. I called it bad luck waiting to happen. He had that restless streak, always chasing a shortcut to success. One year it was car flipping, next year cryptocurrency, then rare whiskey investments. Each one ended the same way, broke angry, blaming someone else. Elaine never liked him much. She tried it first. She cooked for him, helped him with resumes, even drove him home a few times when he'd had too much to drink. But every time she said no to another loan, his smile would harden. "You don't get it," he told her once. "Donald's got plenty. What's a few thousand to him?" I heard that from the kitchen. Walked in just in time to see Elaine stand up from the table, her face calm, but her voice cold. "It's not the money, Gary. It's the respect." He laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. After that, he stopped pretending to be polite. He'd come around less often, but when he did, he carried that bitterness like a badge. He'd mock the way I mowed the lawn on Saturdays, the way Elaine collected her art students' drawings. Perfect couple, he'd sneer. Must be nice. What he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that we weren't perfect. We just learned to fight quietly. Sometimes Elaine would find me sitting alone on the back porch, staring at the empty swing, meant for a child we never had. She'd sit beside me and say, "You still blame yourself, don't you?" And I'd lie, "No." But she knew better. Wives always do. One night, maybe 10 years ago, she told me something that stuck. You can't spend your whole life apologizing for the things you can't fix. I didn't answer then. I still don't have an answer now. We grew old together in that yellow-walled house. Birthdays blurred into anniversaries, summers into winters. She taught until her arthritis made her put down the brush. I retired early, spent my mornings fixing things that didn't need fixing, freeing. When she got sick, lungs first, then everything else, it was Gary who showed up again, pretending to care. He'd sit at her bedside, talk about helping with paperwork, offering to handle things for her. I knew what that meant. He wanted to know where the money was, what the will said, what he could get. Elaine saw it too. After one of his visits, she looked at me and said, "Promise me, Don, when I'm gone, you won't let him ruin what we built." I promised. And now, standing over her grave, watching him wave that forged piece of paper like a trophy, I realize how right she was. Gary always wanted what wasn't his. People like to say blood is thicker than water. I've learned that blood can stain just as easy too. My folks, God bless them, were good people, but blind in the ways parents often are. They loved Gary like he was made of glass, always ready to pick him up when he fell, which was often. When I'd bring up one of his screw-ups, Dad would shake his head and say, "He just needs another chance, Don. You've got everything you need," but Gary's still finding his way. Finding his way. Hell, at 57, he was still getting lost in the same bar parking lots. Mom wasn't any better. She'd send him care packages, pay his overdue bills, even slip him money, just to help him get back on his feet. She never once asked how long those feet planned to stay there. To her, I was the steady one. The son who didn't cause trouble. The one who'd made it married right, kept his head down. She'd pat my hand and say, "You're lucky, Donnie. Some folks aren't lucky." I didn't feel lucky. I felt like the safety net everyone else jumped on when they ran out of rope. Elaine saw it long before I did. She had a way of spotting cracks before they turned into breaks. She never said my family was unfair. She'd just pour herself another cup of coffee and change the subject. But I could see it in her eyes every time Gary came around, the quiet strain, the little flinch when he'd call her sister Elaine, with that crooked grin. Ruth, our neighbor, saw it too. Ruth was 75 and sharper than a switchblade. She'd lived next door for 30 years, the kind of woman who baked pies for the church, but also knew every piece of gossip in Wichita County. One afternoon she caught me in the driveway. "You know your brother's been using your name, right?" she said, handing me a letter that had been misdelivered to her house. It was addressed to Donald J. Henderson from a loan company in Tulsa. Except I hadn't applied for any loan. The note inside mentioned a verbal agreement through Gary Henderson. My jaw clenched. Ruth crossed her arms. "I'd bet my best pie dish he's running tabs in your name. Folks talk." That night, I showed Elaine the letter. She read it twice, her lips tightening with each line. "So that's how he's paying his rent," she muttered. "You need to call Harris." Harris was our lawyer, old school, calm, the kind of man who never raised his voice, but somehow made everyone else lower theirs. He'd handled our home paperwork, the will, the insurance, everything Gary had been snooping about. When I told him what happened, he sighed like he'd been expecting it. "Don, you've got to protect yourself legally. File a notice that no one's authorized to use your name for credit." Gary's getting desperate. Desperate, that word again. I didn't want to believe it. It's hard to think of your own brother as a con man. You start making excuse. Maybe he's lost. Maybe he's just unlucky. Maybe he means well, but doesn't know how to live right. But that illusion cracked when Elaine confronted him. He'd shown up one Saturday morning reeking of whiskey and false charm, carrying a half-dead bouquet from the gas station. I was fixing the fence out back when I heard their voices from the porch. "Elaine, I just need $5,000, Gary said. "Short-term loan. Easy interest." "You said that last time," she replied. "And the time before that. This one's different." She laughed, not kindly. "Gary, you've been saying different since 1995. He must have seen her patience running out because his tone turned mean. "You think you're better than me, don't you? Sitting in that big house judging me while you spend Don's money." I froze, the hammer in my hand midair. "Careful," she said, her voice steady. "You're crossing a line." He snorted. "You and Don, Mr. Perfect Couple. What do you even know about real problems? You can't have kids, and you still act like you've got it all figured out." That did it. I came around the corner, saw her standing stiff, pale. My blood went cold. "That's enough, Gary." He looked at me, defiant. drunk eyes glassy. Just telling the truth, brother. No. You're using truth like a weapon. There's a difference. He laughed that low, ugly laugh I'd come to hate. Always the saint, huh? Maybe if you shared a little more, people wouldn't think you were hoarding your blessings. I walked him to his truck without another word. I could feel Elaine shaking behind me. He muttered all the way down the path, half insults, half self-pity. When his engine finally roared off, the silence that followed felt heavier than thunder. Elaine turned to me, eyes glistening but fierce. Don, he's not just self-destructive anymore. He's dangerous. I nodded, but I didn't say what I was really thinking, that she was right, and that scared the hell out of me. For weeks after that, she avoided him completely. She stopped answering his calls, deleted his texts. I tried to play peacemaker, sending short replies, keeping the peace that wasn't worth keeping. But Gary didn't take rejection well. Next thing I knew, people from the local hardware store were asking about that business deal you mentioned, Dawn. Turns out, Gary had been dropping my name all over town, talking about a joint investment that didn't exist. Elaine found out before I did. She came home one afternoon, slammed her purse down, and tossed a flyer on the table, Henderson Brothers Construction. My name printed right under his. He's going to drag us down with him one day, she said, her voice low, tired. And when he does, he'll make it look like it's your fault. I looked at her then, really looked. The woman who had stood by me through every storm, who had never once asked for more than honesty and peace, was scared. Not of Gary's schemes, but of what they might turn me into. And that was the night I made myself a promise. Whatever Gary did next, I'd stop it before it touched her again. But promises are funny things. Sometimes they keep you alive, and sometimes they just give fate to a better target. Family is supposed to be the one thing you can count on when the world turns cold. But I learned a long time ago, family can also be the first to turn the knife when your back's turned. My parents were good folks by most standards. Church every Sunday, garden in the spring, and a habit of believing the best in people. Trouble was, they only believed the best in Gary. He was the baby of the family, and in their eyes, that meant he could do no wrong. Every time he lost another job, it was bad luck. Every time he borrowed money and didn't pay it back, it was just a misunderstanding. And whenever I tried to step in to talk sense into them, Mom would just sigh and say, Don, you've always been so fortunate. Can't you let your brother have a little help? Fortunate. That word always made me grind my teeth. I worked 30 years in the same factory, saved every dime, and kept food on the table. I wasn't lucky. I was tired. Dad used to joke that Gary had more spirit than I did. You were born an old man, he'd tell me, chuckling. Gary just needs time to grow up. Dad's been saying that since 1980, and Gary's still out there trying to grow up on someone else's dime. Elaine was patient, but she wasn't blind. She tried to make peace. God knows she did. She'd bake pies when my parents came to visit, listen quietly when Mom started praising Gary's latest opportunity. But I could see the tension building behind her calm smile, the kind of smile women wear when they're trying not to explode in front of company. Things really started to crack one Thanksgiving. Everyone was at our house like always. The table was full, turkey, mashed potatoes, wine glasses clinking. And then Gary started in. He leaned back in his chair, wiped gravy from his chin, and said, You know, Don, I'm surprised you never offered to bring me into your business. You could have taught me a thing or two about saving all that money you've been hoarding. Elaine set her fork down so slowly, it scared me more than if she'd thrown it. Don't do that, Gary, she said softly. Do what he asked, fake innocence dripping from his voice. Talk about your brother like he owes you something. Mom gasped like Elaine had just cursed in church. Elaine, he's just joking. But he wasn't. I knew it. She knew it. And when dinner was over, She wouldn't even look at him as he left. That was the night she started pulling away, little by little, the way people step back from a fire that's burning out of control. Ruth, our neighbor, saw it before I did. She was one of those women who notices everything, but pretends she doesn't. Your brother's been driving around town, bragging about business deals with you, she told me one morning while watering her roses. Said he's your partner. Is that true? My gut twisted. No, ma'am. Not even close. Well, she said, adjusting her sun hat, you might want to check that out. Folks at the bank are starting to talk. That same week, Elaine came home holding a white envelope, her face tight. She handed it to me without a word. It was a collection letter from a lender in Kansas City addressed to Donald Henderson, claiming I owed $5,000 on a joint investment loan filed by Gary Henderson and Co. I felt my blood run cold. Elaine folded her arms, waiting for me to say something. I didn't. I couldn't. Finally, she said, call Harris. Harris was our old lawyer, a retired man with shaky hands and a voice like a gravel road. I trusted him with everything. When I showed him the letter, he frowned so deep, his eyebrows nearly touched. Dawn, I've seen this trick before, he said. Your brother's leveraging your name to look credible. You need to act fast. Put a fraud alert. Get notarized statements, everything. I nodded, but inside I just felt sick. This wasn't some stranger trying to scam me. This was my brother. Elaine was furious. He's not just desperate anymore, she said. He's reckless. You can't keep protecting him. I'm not protecting him, I said weakly. He's just your brother, she finished for me. Yeah, I know. That shut me up. Over the next few weeks, Gary doubled down on the lie. I got phone calls from people I didn't even know, friends of his investors, asking about our construction company. One even congratulated me on the new Wichita deal. Elaine finally snapped. She stormed into the kitchen one evening, holding another piece of mail. He's using our address now, she said. Look at this. His business is registered right here at Maple Street. I looked at the paperwork and saw my name listed as a co-signer. Something in her broke right then. I'd seen her angry before, but never like that. She slammed her hands on the table. Donald, this isn't your burden to carry. You can't save a man who doesn't want saving. I tried to calm her down, but she just shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. You've spent your whole life fixing things, Don. But Gary isn't broken. He's rotten. And one day he's going to drag us down with him. Her words hung in the air like smoke. I didn't argue. Deep down, I knew she was right. That night, long after Elaine had gone to bed, I sat alone on the porch staring at the flickering porch light. Gary's voice echoed in my head, the insults, the lies, the entitlement. And I realized maybe family doesn't break all at once. Maybe it cracks slowly over years of quiet forgiveness, until one day it finally gives way. I should have cut him off right then. Should have drawn the line. But I didn't. Because part of me still believed I could hold this family together if I just tried a little harder. That was my mistake. And soon enough, Gary would prove just how right Elaine had been. He's going to drag us down with him one day. The last 3 months of Elaine's life felt like walking through a long hallway with the lights flickering out one by one. You keep thinking you've reached the end, and then another bulb dies, another step disappears beneath your feet. It started with a cough, just a dry tickle in her throat that she brushed off as allergies. It's the paint fumes, she said, blaming the art class she'd been teaching at the community center. But by mid-October, the cough had turned wet, heavy and stubborn. Nights were the worst. I'd wake to her gasping, sitting up in bed, clutching her chest. The doctors ran tests. Chronic lung fibrosis, they said. It wasn't the worst diagnosis, but it wasn't good either. There were treatments, medications, oxygen support, but not cures. I watched her shrink in front of me, that fierce light of hers dimming a little more each day. Gary showed up the second he heard she was sick. I remember the first day he came to the hospital, arms full of flowers, wearing a suit 2 sizes too small, and that fake smile he always wore when he needed something. The nurses thought it was sweet, said, "Your brother must really love his sister-in-law." If only they knew. He'd sit by her bed, tell stories about when they were younger, how Elaine always kept the family together. He'd laugh too loud, hold her hand a little too long. But when she fell asleep, he'd turn to me and start asking questions. "How's the life insurance looking on? She got everything set up right, just making sure she's taken care of. You know, for you." It took every bit of restraint not to throw him out right there. Elaine was too weak to deal with him, and I didn't want to cause a scene. So I played along, smiled, nodded, gritted my teeth. But she wasn't fooled. One night after he left, she turned her head toward me and whispered, "He's digging, Dawn. He's looking for something." I tried to downplay it. "Let him dig. There's nothing to find." She looked at me with that quiet sadness that only comes from knowing you're running out of time. "There's always something to find if you look hard enough," she said. "Especially when people think they deserve what isn't theirs." A few days later, she asked to go home. The doctors weren't thrilled, but they understood. "Hospitals aren't where people want to spend their last good days," Dr. Hall said softly. So I brought her home. I set up the oxygen tank by her side of the bed, cleared out her art supplies to make room for her medicine. The house smelled like antiseptic and lavender, the scent of love and slow endings. One evening, the rain came. Hard, unrelenting, pounding against the windows like a drumbeat. I was sitting beside her bed, holding her hand while she drifted in and out of sleep. "Dawn," she said suddenly, her voice thin but steady. "Yeah, honey, I need you to listen carefully." She reached for the drawer beside her bed and pulled out a small envelope sealed and addressed to Mr. Harris, attorney at law. "This is my will," she said. "The real one. The only one that matters." I felt my stomach tighten. "You've already got one, don't you?" "I did," she said. "But I updated it last week. Harris helped me. There were witnesses, the nurse Ruth from next door. Everything's official." She paused, coughing into her handkerchief before continuing. "I didn't change much. The house still goes to you, but I added a few things, small gifts for my students, a donation to the community center, and I made sure Gary gets nothing. Not a cent." Her eyes glistened when she said it, but there was no bitterness in her tone, just calm certainty. "I know how he is, Dawn, and I know he'll come after you when I'm gone. That's why Harris has the original and a notarized copy. There's another in our safety deposit box at the First National. You don't have to worry." I nodded, trying to stay composed, but my throat was burning. "You think he'd really—" "I don't think," she cut in gently. "I know." We sat there in silence for a long while, listening to the rain against the roof. After a while she whispered, "Promise me something. Anything. Don't let anger be the last thing you feel when I'm gone. Promise me you'll protect what we built. But do it with dignity." I couldn't speak. I just squeezed her hand. That was the night I realized she'd already made peace with leaving. I hadn't. Not even close. The next few weeks blurred together: hospital visits, home care, short bursts of hope followed by long hours of fear. Gary kept coming around, bringing cheap flowers and fake sympathy. He'd hover in doorways pretending to check on her, while his eyes scanned the room like a thief casing a house. Once I caught him going through the drawer where she kept her paperwork. He said he was looking for a Bible. I didn't believe that any more than he did. Elaine knew. She didn't say anything, but one night after he left she whispered, "Don't let him near my things again." The last time Gary saw her alive, she told him she forgave him for everything. He cried loud theatrical sobs that didn't match the blank look in his eyes. I stood in the corner, holding my tongue. 3 days later, she was gone. The morning she passed, the world was too quiet. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. I sat beside her bed for hours holding her cold hand, trying to find the words I never said when she was alive. When Gary called, his voice cracked just enough to sound believable. "I'm sorry, Dawn. I really am." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But deep down something told me this wasn't the end of his grief. It was the beginning of his plan. I thought that was the last time Gary would ever hurt us. I was wrong. The morning of the funeral, Wichita was gray and windless, the kind of sky that looks like it's holding its breath. The church smelled of lilies and rain-damp coats. I stood at the front beside the casket, feeling like the world had gone silent, except for the faint hum of the organ. Elaine looked peaceful. That was the cruel part. She looked exactly the way I'd always known her, soft, kind, still carrying that quiet light that made every place she stood feel like home. People filed past, murmuring condolences they didn't mean. She was such a lovely woman. You two were the perfect couple. God must have needed an angel. I nodded, shook hands, smiled when I had to. My body moved automatically, but my mind was somewhere else, stuck on the sound of her voice the night before she died, whispering, "Don't let him ruin what we built." And then Gary walked in. He came late, of course. Always did love an entrance. Black suit, red tie, sunglasses even though the sun hadn't shown its face all morning. His daughter Lily trailed behind him, clutching a stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide and confused. She was only 10, too young to understand the storm her father was about to summon. He greeted people like he was running for office, hugs, pats on the back, handshakes that lingered too long. Then he came to me, took off his sunglasses and gave me a look so solemn it could have fooled God himself. "I'm sorry, brother," he said softly. "She meant the world to all of us." I didn't answer. I couldn't trust my voice. The service started. Pastor James spoke about faith and mercy, about love that endures beyond death. I tried to listen, but all I could hear was Gary's restless shifting behind me, the soft rustle of paper every few minutes. And then, just as the pastor said the final amen, Gary stood up. He didn't wait to be invited. Just stepped into the aisle, cleared his throat, and said loudly, "Before we leave today, I have something important to share. Something Elaine wanted the family to know." The room froze. I turned slowly. His face was the picture of grief, trembling, lip-wet eyes, voice shaking with practiced sincerity. "She left a letter," he said, holding up a folded document. Her final words. I wasn't sure if I should read it, but she wanted the truth to come out. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My mother gasped softly. My father's jaw tightened. I didn't move. Gary unfolded the paper like it was a sacred scroll. "Elaine confessed something before she passed," he said. "She couldn't live with the guilt anymore. She wanted peace before meeting God." Every head turned toward him. The silence was suffocating. "She wrote," he continued, his voice trembling just enough to sound real. "Lily is not Gary's daughter. She belongs to Donald. He is her biological father." It was like the air was sucked out of the room. I heard a woman gasp. Someone dropped their prayer book. Even the pastor just stood there, eyes wide, mouth open. Gary pressed on, milking every second. Elaine regretted keeping it secret. She said she wanted Lily to have what's rightfully hers. Half the Maple Street house as her inheritance. My heart stopped. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. Half the house, my house. The one Elaine and I built nail by nail, he kept talking, voice breaking into all the right places. Elaine loved Donald, but she couldn't face the truth while she was alive. Now she wants peace for all of us. There was a pause, a long, terrible pause, where everyone seemed to look at me at once. I could feel their stares burning holes in my back. pity in some, curiosity in others. And a few, the worst few, looked almost entertained. Ruth was sitting 2 pews behind me. I saw her straighten up, her sharp old eyes narrowing. She didn't look surprised, just angry. "Gary," she said quietly but firmly enough to cut through the murmurs. "That's a mighty serious claim to make at a funeral." He turned toward her, feigning hurt. "I know, Mrs. Holloway. I didn't want to do this. But Elaine asked me to. She wanted truth, not secrets. She also wanted peace," Ruth shot back. "And you're making sure she gets neither." A few people nodded. Others whispered. The air felt heavy, electric. I stood perfectly still. My pulse thudded in my ears. I looked at Lily, poor kid, clutching that rabbit tighter than ever, her eyes darting between her father and me. She didn't understand, but she felt it. The tension, the shame. Gary held up the paper like a victory flag. "This letter is notarized," he lied smoothly. "I'll be filing it with our attorney, Mr. Harris, later today." Elaine wanted this to be official. I clenched my wrists. Harris. The same man who held the real will, locked safely away at the bank. The lie was so bold it almost stole my breath. Mom's face had gone pale. She looked from Gary to me, Kenoshi's twisting her features. "Donald," she whispered. "Is that true?" I met her eyes, then turned away. There was no point arguing. Not here. Not over Elaine's coffin. Gary mistook my silence for surrender. "Dawn," he said softly, fake compassion, dripping from every word. "I know. This is hard, but it's time to be honest. For Lily's sake." I looked at him, really looked, and saw the greed hiding under that thin veil of sorrow. He wasn't grieving. He was performing. I wanted to scream, to call him out for the liar he was. But Elaine's voice came back to me. "Don't let anger be the last thing you feel." So I didn't. I just nodded once slowly and said, "Thank you for sharing that, Gary." He blinked, caught off guard. "So, you admit it?" I almost smiled. "No," I said softly. "But I'll let the truth speak for itself soon enough." I turned, placed my hand on the casket, and whispered, "Rest now, honey." Then I walked out of that church with every whisper trailing behind me like a shadow. "Did you hear what he said? Maybe it's true. They never had kids. Poor Elaine. Poor Dawn." Outside, the wind had picked up. The gray sky finally broke open, spilling rain, like the heavens couldn't hold it anymore. Ruth followed me out, placing a wrinkled hand on my arm. "You don't have to fight him today," she said. "But you will. I know you." I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. He just made his first mistake. Behind us, the church doors creaked shut. The storm was just beginning. The morning after the funeral, Wichita woke to a sky the color of ash. The kind that makes the world look drained of life, like grief had painted over everything. I hadn't slept. My hands still smelled faintly of lilies and rain. I drove to the First National Bank, just after sunrise, before the lobby opened. The streets were empty except for a delivery truck and a stray dog crossing Maple. The bank manager, Mrs. Foster, recognized me instantly. Elaine and I had been customers there for 20 years, always the couple who came in together, who still smiled at the tellers, like it was 1989. Her voice softened when she saw me. "Mr. Henderson, I heard about Elaine. I'm so sorry. She was one of the kindest women I've ever met." I nodded. My throat tightened. "Thank you, ma'am. I need to open our safe deposit box." She hesitated for a moment, like she wanted to offer sympathy, but knew better than to intrude. "Of course. You're still listed as co-owner. I'll take you downstairs." The vault was colder than I remembered. The hum of the fluorescent lights echoed against concrete walls. Mrs. Foster handed me a clipboard and said gently, "Take all the time you need, Mr. Henderson." I signed my name, inserted the small key Elaine and I had shared for years, and turned it. The click echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Inside, I found a small metal box, lighter than I expected. My fingers trembled as I lifted it onto the table. I hesitated before opening it, afraid of what I might find, or worse, what I might feel. The first thing I saw was an envelope marked in Elaine's neat handwriting. For Donald, in case you ever need to remember what's true. Beneath it were several folders. One labeled Medical Records, another Will Soy, updated 2023 Witnessed, and a small sealed bag containing a black USB stick. My heart started pounding. I opened the medical file first. There it was, the proof Gary would never have imagined existed. Hospital records from Wichita Memorial, dated May 1985, long before I ever met Elaine. They detailed the injury from a construction accident that had left me permanently infertile. Clinical terms, sterile signatures, cold truths written in ink. I ran my thumb over the doctor's name, Dr. Peterson, long retired by now. The report was notarized, stamped, certified. Unmistakable. Gary's claim, his entire story, was impossible. Biologically, legally, in every way. Next, I opened the folder marked Will. Elaine's handwriting, again steady and clean, despite the tremor she'd developed in her last months. Inside was the official last will and testament of Elaine Henderson, signed March 2, 2023. Witnessed by Ruth Holloway and Nurse Carol Benton, notarized by Harris & Company's attorneys. It was flawless, legally airtight. Every page bore Elaine's initials. The signature page carried 3 stamps, the witness's, the attorney's seal, and the notary's embossed mark. The contents were exactly as she'd told me, that night in the rain. The house, all assets, life insurance, everything to me. Donations to the Community Art Center. Scholarships for 2 of her students. Nothing for Gary. Not a single penny. And then, at the bottom of the file, a short line in her handwriting, to be read only if any dispute arises following my death. She knew. Somehow she knew. I sat there for a long moment, staring at her name, feeling the weight of every choice she'd made to protect me. Finally, I opened the last envelope, the one addressed directly to me. Inside was a handwritten letter. The paper was thin, a little smudged at the corners, as if she'd held it too long before sealing it. My dearest Dawn, if you are reading this, it means the peace I wanted for us has been disturbed. I'm sorry for that. I know you'll try to stay calm, to see the good in people, even when they've wronged you. That's what makes you who you are. But please don't let Gary take your kindness and turn it into weakness. Protect yourself, but don't lose your heart. The world will try to make you choose between justice and compassion. Don't let it. You can have both. I left proof of the truth, not to hurt anyone, but to protect you when I no longer can. Mr. Harris knows everything. Ruth was there the day I signed. And in this box, there's one more thing, the USB drive. It holds a recording. A conversation between Gary and me, 3 months before I got sick. I told him I knew he was lying to people using your name, borrowing money he couldn't pay back. I told him to stop before he ruined both of you. I wanted to believe he'd listen, but he laughed, Dawn. He laughed and said, "You'll be gone soon, and I'll make it right my way. Keep this. You'll know when to use it. And if you ever face Gary alone, remember this. Protect yourself, but don't lose your kindness. Love, always, Elaine." I don't remember when the tears started falling. They weren't loud, not the kind you sob through. They were tired tears, the kind that come from missing someone who once steadied your world. I pressed the letter to my chest and let the silence wrap around me. After a while, I picked up the USB, small and cold between my fingers. I turned it over the metal, catching the dim light of the vault. I imagined her recording it, her voice trembling, but firm, doing what she'd always done, protecting me even from beyond the grave. I slipped everything carefully back into the box, except for the USB and the letter. Those I kept. When I signed out of the vault, Mrs. Foster asked softly, "Did you find what you needed, Mr. Henderson?" I looked at her, my eyes still raw. "I found what I'd forgotten," I said quietly. Elaine never left me unprepared. Outside the rain had stopped. The air was cool, the streets shining like glass. I walked to my truck, started the engine, and sat there for a long time. The lie Gary told yesterday replayed in my head. The gasps, the whispers, the humiliation. I pictured his smug face waving that forged will like a flag. And then I looked down at the USB, in my palm, the truth waiting. I tightened my grip until the metal edge bit into my skin. "Now, Elaine," I whispered, voice steady for the first time since she died. "Let's finish what you started." The next morning, I drove straight to Harris & Comefield. The old brick building sat on the corner of Douglas and Main, the same office where Elaine and I had signed our will all those years ago. The brass letters on the glass door still read, "Integrity above all." I wondered what Harris would think if he knew how badly integrity was bleeding in my family. He was waiting for me. Robert Harris, 72, gray suit, steady voice, eyes that could still cut through a lie before it finished leaving your lips. He rose when I entered, offered a quiet handshake. "Donald," he said softly. "Elaine was one of the finest clients I ever had. I'm so sorry." I nodded, unable to say much more than, "She thought the world of you." He motioned to the leather chair across from his desk. "I heard some claims were made at the funeral." "Claims," I said bitterly, is a polite word for what he did. I told him everything, the fake letter, Gary's speech about Lily being my daughter, the forged will. Harris listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening just slightly when I mentioned the forgery. When I finished, he pushed his glasses up his nose and said, "Donald, what your brother did isn't just immoral. It's criminal. Forgery, defamation, attempted fraud. And if he used your name for financial purposes, identity theft." He opened a drawer and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the desk toward me. "Nora Kent, private investigator. She's an old friend," he said. "Used to work for the Wichita PD. Smart, tough, but fair. You'll want someone who can dig into Gary's mess without making you look like you're out for revenge." I looked down at the card. "Revenge isn't what I'm after," I said quietly. "I just want my wife's name clean." He smiled faintly. "That's what makes you different from him." I met Nora Kent that same afternoon at a diner off Kellogg Street. She was in her mid-50s, with short silver hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and forgotten nothing. She wore jeans, a leather jacket, and a calm confidence that reminded me of Elaine, steady, no nonsense, but kind beneath the armor. She listened while I explained everything, taking notes on a yellow pad, her pen moving with a rhythm that felt almost musical. When I told her about the USB, her eyes flicked up sharply. "You still have it?" I nodded. "Good. Don't share it yet. We'll verify it first, then use it if needed." She sipped her black coffee, then leaned forward. "Here's what I'll do. I'll pull his financials, talk to a few people in town, maybe visit whoever printed that forgery. You'd be surprised how often fraud leaves a paper trail. Give me a week." A week later, she called me back to Harris's office. When I arrived, she already had a folder open on the table, neat, organized, deadly. "Your brother's been busy," she said. Inside were copies of credit reports, foreclosure notices, bank statements, all under Gary's name. He owed more than $150,000 across 5 banks and 3 credit cards. His house was in pre-foreclosure 2 months from seizure. Most of the debts from personal loans, Nora said. He's been gambling again. Online sports betting mostly. Lost big on the Chiefs game last season. After that, he started borrowing from private lenders. She tapped one page with her pen. "This one's interesting. A $25,000 loan application from just last month, submitted under Donald Henderson. My stomach dropped. He used my name again. Almost, she said. He stopped the process halfway through when the bank flagged the Social Security mismatch. Looks like he was preparing paperwork, fake driver's license, fake signature, everything. I've seen identity theft rings with less creativity. I sat back staring at the papers. Every line felt like another nail in a coffin I hadn't built. Harris exhaled, his tone grave. If this goes public, Donald, it won't just be gossip. It'll be a legal nightmare. He's not just dragging your reputation, he's committing fraud in your name. Nora nodded. We also traced the forged will. He had help. A guy named Dean Markley, freelance graphic designer, small-time hustler. Used to do fake IDs for bars back in college. Gary paid him $800 to recreate a signature from one of Elaine's old Christmas cards. We've got text messages and payment receipts. I could barely breathe. You found all that in a week. She shrugged lightly. People like your brother always leave breadcrumbs. They think they are smarter than everyone else. But greed doesn't erase fingerprints. Harris leaned forward. The question now is, what do you want to do with it? I stared at the folder. Pictures of Gary's signature, text transcripts, financial documents, all the proof anyone would ever need. My brother's downfall neatly stapled and time-stamped. I could press charges, I said slowly. Have him arrested. Let him rot. Yes, Harris said carefully. But it'll tear your family apart completely. Your parents will side with him, at least at first. They always do. You'll be the villain for exposing him. I looked down at my hands, scarred, calloused, older than I remembered. I'd built a life on fixing things, not destroying them. But this wasn't a broken chair or a leaky roof. This was rot. Deep spreading rot. I don't want to hurt him, I said quietly. But I can't let him keep doing this. Nora studied me for a moment, then said something that stuck with me. Donald, you can't save a drowning man who keeps pulling you under. Her words hit harder than I expected. She slid another envelope across the table, her report neatly bound. Everything's here. But if you're going to hit him, she said, her tone softening, don't swing in anger. Swing in truth. I nodded slowly, closing the folder. The truth. That was something Gary couldn't fake, forge, or borrow. As I walked out of Harris's office, the evening light spilled through the windows, long and golden. For the first time since Elaine's funeral, I felt steady. Gary had declared war at my wife's grave. Now I had the ammunition he didn't see coming. But Nora was right. This wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about justice. And justice, I decided, would come quietly, but it would come clean. I waited until dusk to call him. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that feels alive, waiting, listening. I dialed Gary's number with steady hands. He answered on the third ring. Don. Yeah, I said. We need to talk. Tonight. My place. There was a pause long enough for me to imagine that smirk forming on his face. So you finally came to your senses, he said. Something like that. 7 o'clock. He laughed. Sure thing, big brother. Guess we can settle this like family, huh? I hung up before he could say another word. By 7, the sky had gone dark, thick Kansas clouds pressing down, thunder murmuring somewhere far off. I left the porch light off. Inside, I'd set up the small digital recorder Harris had lent me, tucked neatly on the side table. Kansas is a one-party consent state, which meant as long as I knew the conversation was being recorded, the law said it was fair zone. I poured 2 glasses of whiskey and waited. When Gary's truck pulled into the driveway, its headlights swept across the living room walls, flickering shadows like ghosts moving through the house. Elaine once filled with laughter. He came in without knocking as usual. Smelled like aftershave and arrogance. Well, look at you, he said, glancing around. still playing the grieving widower. Must be lonely in here. I didn't flinch. I just gestured toward the chair across from me. Sit. He smirked, sank into the chair, and took the drink I'd poured for him. So what's this about? You ready to admit what Elaine told me? What did she tell you again? I asked, calm. He leaned back, pretending casual. You know damn well. About Lily, about the wheel. You can stop pretending now. Let's make this simple. You sign over half the house to her, and I'll make sure nobody digs deeper. I studied him for a long moment. You really think that'll work? He grinned. It already has. People believe it. Hell, even Mom's calling me every hour asking when Lily gets her share. The town's buzzing. You can't fight a story once it's out there. I nodded slowly. You're right about that. Then I reached into my pocket and slid a folded paper across the table. Elaine's real will. He frowned, squinting. What's this? Why don't you read it? He scanned the first page, and I saw the color drain from his face. This isn't the same one. No, I said evenly. It's not. This one's notarized, witnessed, signed, and sealed. The one you waved around, that was garbage. He looked up sharply, his mask cracking. You can't prove that. I don't have to, I said. Elaine already did. For the first time that night, he looked nervous. His hand trembled slightly as he set the paper down. You can't make this stick, Dawn. Nobody's gonna believe you over a dead woman. Maybe not me, I said quietly, but they'll believe her voice. His eyes narrowed. What the hell does that mean? I let the silence stretch just long enough to make him squirm. Then I said, she recorded you. He froze. That's bullshit. I didn't answer. I just let the storm outside fill the space. Low thunder rolling through the house, the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Finally, he barked a laugh. You're bluffing. Elaine wouldn't do that. She was too soft. She was kind, I said. Not stupid. He slammed his glass down, the sound sharp in the quiet. You think you can trap me with fake evidence? You think anyone's gonna care about some edited file? You really shouldn't talk about editing, Gary, I said. Not after what you did to her signature. His head snapped up. What, Dean Markley? I continued, calm as stone. Freelance designer. $800 for a forged will. You sent him the Christmas card from 2016 to copy her handwriting. He blinked just once, then tried to recover. You can't prove that. Sure I can. He kept the payment receipts. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. His face twitched, panic bleeding through his bravado. You've been digging, he muttered. No, I said. She did. Before she did. He stood suddenly, knocking over his glass. You can't do this to me, Dawn. You think you're so righteous, but you've always been the golden boy. Perfect job, perfect wife. You never had to crawl for anything. His voice cracked louder with each word. I had nothing. Nothing but debts and pity. You think anyone cared about me? You and Elaine had everything. He leaned over the table, his face inches from mine, eyes wild. So yeah, I made that will. I deserved something. You hear me? I deserved something. The words hung in the air, raw, furious, and damning. I didn't move, didn't blink. I just looked at him the way a man looks at a mirror he no longer recognizes. When he realized what he'd said, he stepped back, breath ragged. Wait, Dawn? I didn't mean... But it was too late. I reached over to the small table beside me and pressed the button. The soft click of the recorder stopping sounded like thunder in the quiet room. He stared at it, horror dawning in his eyes. You were recording me. Kansas is a one-party consent state, I said flatly. You should have looked that up before coming here. His mouth opened and closed, no words left to find. I stood sliding the recorder into my pocket. You didn't just bury Elaine, Gary. He swallowed hard. You buried whatever was left of your soul. For a moment, he looked like he might say something, maybe beg, maybe scream, but then his shoulders slumped, the fight gone from him. Outside, lightning split the sky open. For a heartbeat, the whole room glowed white, two brothers frozen in the middle of a war. Neither one could ever truly win. When the light faded, Gary turned and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him, and the storm swallowed the sound of his footsteps. I stood alone in the dim light, hands still resting on the pocket where the recorder sat heavy, warm, undeniable. Elaine's voice echoed in my head, solemn and certain. Protect yourself, but don't lose your kindness. I whispered to the empty room. I'm trying, honey. I'm trying. 2 days after that storm, I sat in Harris's office again. The same leather chair, the same faint smell of old books and truth. On the table lay the recorder, the printed transcript, the bank records, and the forged will. It was everything we needed to destroy Gary completely. Harris folded his hands, his voice measured. Donald, with this evidence, the DA will have no trouble pressing charges. We're talking multiple felonies, forgery, identity theft, defamation, attempted fraud. He could face 10 years. I stared at the stack of paper for a long moment. 10 years. 10 years for the man who'd lied at Elaine's funeral, who'd tried to steal her name, who'd broken our parents' trust and mocked her memory. Part of me wanted to say yes. Part of me wanted to see him in handcuffs. But another part, the part Elaine would have loved most, whispered, no. I looked up at Harris. I'm not ready to hand him to the law. Not yet. He frowned slightly. Donald, this is your chance to end it. I don't want to end him, I said quietly. I just want him to understand what he did. I want the truth to do what prison can't. Harris leaned back, studying me for a long moment. Then what are you planning? I exhaled slowly. A meeting. The whole family. Everyone who heard his lies. By Sunday afternoon, my living room was full. My parents sat stiffly on the couch, Dad staring at the floor, Mom clutching a tissue she hadn't used yet, but would soon. Gary stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes bloodshot. The bravado was gone, replaced by something raw and cornered. Ruth, our next-door neighbor, sat quietly in the corner, the same woman who'd watched Elaine plant her last garden. Harris was there too, briefcase beside him, a silent guardian of truth. I took a breath. Thank you all for coming. Mom's voice trembled first. Donald, this is unnecessary. Gary's been through enough. He made mistakes. But Mom, I said softly, please, let me finish, before you defend him. She flinched, and I hated that I'd spoken like that. But it was time. Gary muttered, this is ridiculous. But his voice lacked conviction. I reached into my pocket and set the recorder on the table. Its red light blinked once as I pressed play. The room filled with Gary's voice. You think anyone cared about me? You and Elaine had everything. So yeah, I made that will. I deserved something. The sound was crisp, undeniable. The thunder from that night echoed faintly in the background, a ghost of the storm still haunting the tape. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dad looked up, his face, pale eyes wet with disbelief. Gary's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him with every word. You didn't just bury Elaine, Gary. You buried whatever was left of your soul. The recording ended. Silence swallowed the room. No one moved. Finally, Mom whispered, Gary, please tell me that wasn't real. He didn't answer, just stood there, eyes glassy, jaw trembling. Dad spoke next, voice cracked and heavy. Son, we defended you your whole damn life. Every mistake, every debt, every lie. But this, he shook his head. You shamed your brother. You shamed all of us. Gary covered his face with his hands, muttering something that sounded like an apology, but fell apart halfway through. I stood there watching the collapse of everything I used to call family order. 3 generations parents who refused to see a brother, who refused to stop taking, and me finally refusing to stay silent. Ruth broke the stillness with a quiet sigh. Elaine would have been proud of you, Donald. She always said the truth finds its way home. I nodded, my throat thick. It did today. When Gary finally looked up, his eyes were red and desperate. So what now? You gonna have me arrested? Is that what you want? I shook my head slowly. No. He blinked, confused. Then what the hell do you want from me? I glanced at Harris, who opened his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a legal document. It's a temporary guardianship agreement, I said. For Lily. Gary's jaw clenched. What, you're drowning, Gary, I said quietly. Debt, lies, anger, all of it. You're not fit to raise that little girl right now. She deserves stability. Someone who can keep her safe while you get the help you need. He laughed bitterly. You think you can just take my daughter? I don't want to take her, I said, my voice breaking just slightly. I want to protect her. This isn't punishment. It's a lifeline. You'll go into treatment, counseling. You'll pay off your debts with the help of Harris's firm managing your finances. Once you're stable, we'll revisit it. But until then, I'll take care of her. He looked around the room at our parents, at Ruth, at the lawyer. No one defended him this time, not even Mom. Finally, his eyes filled with tears he tried and failed to hide. You'd do that. After everything I did, I swallowed hard. Because she's innocent. And because I still remember the brother you used to be. He stared at the floor for a long time, then picked up the pen. His hand shook as he signed. When he finished, Harris notarized the document, quietly placing it into his briefcase. It's binding, he said. This is a chance for redemption, not revenge. Gary nodded weakly, his shoulders collapsing inward. I'm sorry, he whispered. For everything. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, at the man who'd once been my kid brother, the boy who'd followed me everywhere, who used to laugh so hard he'd snort milk out his nose. That boy was gone. But maybe, just maybe, this was how we found him again. As he walked out the door, Mom sobbed quietly. Dad just sat there staring at the wall, like he'd finally seen the truth after a lifetime of pretending not to. Ruth touched my arm gently before leaving. You did right, Don, she said. Justice without cruelty. That's rare these days. I stood there watching the sun sink through the window, gold light bleeding into shadows, the house warm again, for the first time in months. Gary would face his reckoning, not in a courtroom, but in his own conscience. Elaine's name was cleared. The lies were done. And Lily, that sweet little girl, would have a chance at something better. I poured a small glass of whiskey, lifted it toward the fading light, and said quietly, I chose justice, not revenge. And somehow that hurt him more. A year can change the shape of grief. It never leaves, but it softens around the edges like a sharp stone worn smooth by the river. It's been 12 months since Elaine's funeral. The house feels quieter, but not empty. There's life here again, laughter that doesn't ache, silence that doesn't wound. The spring wind smells of lilacs and soil. Out in the garden, the one Elaine loved most, I've been planting roses, her favorites. She used to say roses were like people, beautiful, yes, but full of thorns that protect what's worth keeping. I kneel in the dirt wearing her old gardening gloves, faded and loose on my hands. The earth is cool. I plant each stem carefully, pat the soil around its base, and whisper her name. It's become a ritual, a way of talking to her without needing words. Behind me, a little voice breaks the quiet. Uncle Don. Can I water them now? I turn, smiling. Lily stands there holding the small blue watering can I bought her last week. She's taller now, her hair lighter, her laugh easier. The darkness that once shadowed her eyes is gone. Go ahead, sweetheart, I say. She runs over, careful but determined, pouring water over the fresh soil. Her little sneakers sink into the mud, and she giggles. For a moment, I see Elaine in her, the same gentle focus, the same joy in small things. Gary's name comes to mind, but not with bitterness anymore. He's been sober for 8 months, part of a volunteer program at a shelter in Topeka. He calls every Sunday. The conversations are short, sometimes awkward, but honest. That's enough for now. He sends drawings from Lily crayon suns and stick figures holding hands. Us, she says proudly whenever we get a new one in the mail. He's paying off his debts little by little, working part-time at the shelter kitchen. Harris checks in on him, makes sure he's staying clean and keeping his head down. Every update feels like another crack of light, breaking through a long, dark winter. In March, I started something new, a scholarship fund in Elaine's name. The Elaine Henderson Memorial, grant for women over 50 returning to school after loss or hardship. Elaine used to tell her students that it's never too late to start over, not at 40, not at 60, not even at 80, she'd say. So I took her words and built something with them. The first recipient was a 62-year-old widow named Marie Allen, who went back to study social work after losing her husband. When I told her the scholarship came from Elaine's name, she cried and said, "Then your wife's heart is still teaching." That night, I poured a small glass of whiskey, sat by the window, and whispered, "You're still changing lives, Elaine, just like you wanted." Life has slowed, and maybe that's its own reward. I fix things around the neighborhood, a broken fence here, a leaky roof there. Ruth stops by sometimes with pie and stories I've already heard but don't mind hearing again. The air feels lighter these days, not because I've forgotten, but because I've forgiven, starting with myself. I used to think forgiveness meant letting someone off the hook. But now I understand it's letting yourself off the hook too, freeing yourself from the endless replay of pain. Elaine once told me, forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's remembering with peace. I think I'm finally there. I still visit her grave every Sunday. I bring fresh roses from the garden. Sometimes Lily comes with me, holding my hand, asking innocent questions only a child can ask. Does Aunt Elaine see us? I think so, I tell her. She's probably laughing at how messy my garden looks. Lily giggles and says, then she must be laughing a lot. And that sound, her laughter in the spring air, it's like music. Last week, I got a letter from Gary. No excuses this time, no self-pity, just honesty. I don't deserve forgiveness, Dawn, but I'm trying to earn it anyway. Lily talks about you every day. I know you've done more for her than I ever did. Maybe one day when I'm stronger, I'll be the father she deserves. Until then, thank you for being the man I couldn't be. I read that letter 3 times, then folded it neatly and placed it in the same box where Elaine's will used to be. Not because it erased what happened, but because it finally balanced the scales, not in the court of law, but in the court of the heart. The world didn't need to see Gary punished to understand justice had been served. The truth had done its job. It restored what revenge never could: dignity. This morning, the sun broke through the clouds, warm and golden, painting the house in light. I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching Lily chase butterflies across the yard. The roses were blooming, full, vibrant, alive. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a man defined by loss. I felt like a man who'd survived it with grace. Elaine's voice echoed in my mind again, soft and clear as spring wind. Sometimes the kindest revenge is to live well, and with grace. I smiled, whispering back into the morning light, I think you'd be proud, honey. The garden shimmered with dew. Lily's laughter carried through the yard. And somewhere in that stillness, I swear I could almost hear Elaine laughing too, not from memory, but from peace. People keep asking me if I ever forgave my brother. Truth is, I didn't have to. Life did it for me. He lost everything that money could buy, and I found peace in things it never could. These days I wake up to the sound of Lily laughing in the kitchen, and that's enough. That's more than enough. Elaine used to say, the kindest revenge is to live well and with grace. Now I understand what she meant. So if you've ever been broken, lied to, or betrayed by your own blood, don't let it turn you cruel. Stand tall. Live well. That's how you win.